Hi guys, I'm Brad Montgomery and welcome to The Breakdown. And here we talk about science, psychology, and investing. Today, we're going to be talking about gardening and specifically community gardening. Before we get started, if you missed any of our episodes, you can always head over to kfoxtv.com/community/the-breakdown. Now let's break it down. And we're back with Eduardo Rascon, horticultural agent with Texas A&M. And this is one thing that both you and Denise have mentioned to me before, and it's called community gardening. And I'm curious about kind of what it is and what it all involves and what people can learn, where they can do it. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff that we can get into, but let's start off and just talk about what it is, first of all.
Yes, of course. So the way that I think about a community garden is a designated space that has either been selected by a neighborhood, maybe an association, even a church, where the designated space is going to be utilized to grow vegetables that can later kind of full circle go back into the community, either that association or that church, or it can actually expand from there. So it's a dedicated area where people get together and they either decide what's the plan for that garden, what are we going to grow, so that we can help the same community there.
And so, we were just talking right before we had started. How many of these are there around town? I guess there's multiple.
Yes, there's multiples. There's quite a bit of different food hubs or community gardens, what we call that. I know that it's one of the ones that we work at is the teaching and demonstration garden at Escarate. Okay. But then there's another community garden by Valle Verde, by actually the fountains in the back part of the fountains. It's called Vista del Valle Community Garden. But then throughout the city, there's also food networks and food hubs that also do kind of like Desert Spoon. It's a church here locally. They also have a community garden where they actually the food goes into the pantry.
Wow.
So that's really
cool.
interesting. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I guess you guys have what are called community gardening events, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So first, typically when do they take place? And then what can people learn?
I want to say that the majority of community gardens will focus one time out of the year is the harvesting time. Okay. So usually when everything gets planted, usually in early spring, it takes a little bit to actually get major production in order for you to have excess in order to share. Usually the one at Escarate Garden, in the past, I know that usually we plant everything in early spring and it kind of has some production by April, May. It gets a little bit reduced because of the heat, and then we come back in fall. So those are usually times where we actually have bountiful harvest, what we call like excess harvest, that it's not only shared through the volunteers, but it's also something that we can actually help the community. We've done the Opportunity Center. We usually take like pounds of tomatoes or pounds of different types of greens, kale. Oh, wow. And then depending on the community garden, if it's continuously growing things because they go through spring, summer, and winter, that's when it also goes into kind of like, okay, we have another event in fall where we can actually show people how to grow things in different types of conditions, right?
So it's kind of almost seasonally based, I guess. Like if you attend an event early on in the growing season, it's going to be more, prepping of soil and planting and selecting plants. And then maybe at the end, and of course, the middle part of the year, I'm sure, irrigation, watering, etc. And then at the end of the year, harvesting, like proper harvesting techniques. And because I know, and just really quickly on that, you mentioned harvesting. I know you don't want to over harvest because you can reduce the plant's ability to grow more at that point.
True. There's a couple of things that one of them is if you over harvest, maybe you are also stressing the plant. So we usually don't I guess the best way to describe it is during summer. There's actually not a lot of harvest because the plants go into kind of survival mode. Yeah. But what we tend to do is, okay, anything that's there, usually it's taking away resources, right? So like if it's a lot of tomatoes, it's taking a lot of water, it usually fades away. So and it's also about the planning of the garden. If you plant ahead of time, you might have some production, it kind of stops and then you go back. So in the past, we've done events such as it also depends on the community garden, because we have a youth component. We have a little youth section. So those events kind of come and go depending on the school academic year. So we also want to try to invite families. Like we recently had a plant sale too. So it's a all-encompassing kind of, there's multiple versions of events that can happen, but the majority of it at the end of the day is to give back to the community.
So it's kind of ongoing events through the year. And a couple of things that you touched on that I'm curious about. One, you mentioned bringing in some of the younger, to learn how to garden.
Yes.
And the one at Scarate Park, is that one of the places where you bring some students in or kids? Or
we do. So it depends on how active that year is. So post-COVID, we're starting to get back kind of like that interest into going into field trips. Yeah. We hosted several high schools. We hosted several entities such as the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts too. So they come in, we kind of teach them. We have like a little corner that we call the kids garden. We allow them to see all of the process of like how enjoyable gardening can be. Mm-hmm. We have a pond, and then we also have the vegetable portion. We try to inform kind of like the adults or like the mentors, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get kids to actually eat more veggies. So if you want to try them, so different age groups too.
And they can taste so much better when they're fresh.
Exactly.
It's like a huge difference. I know some people that don't like tomatoes, but right off the plant, they're like, well, I like that.
Yes.
It tastes so much. There's just such an amazing flavor to it. So before I get into back to the events, I want to circle back to that in a second. But also you mentioned something that I'm curious. I didn't know you guys do a plant sale.
We do. We it doesn't happen every year, but usually if time permits and resources permit, we usually try to also kind of pair that up with a community event. So we want to inform people what things that can grow. So we usually pair it up with an information table so that they can come, like the community can come and ask, hey, what trees can I plant here? And then take advantage of what we are selling as in this past season.
Because there's like a good options, basically.
We did ornamental plants.
Okay.
But in previous years, we've done different types of plant sales, such as roses or vegetable seedlings.
Okay.
Which is perfect because we educate, but we also give you the plants to start.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So we're going to go through like some of the stuff. I know like it's when you attend one of these, you're going to learn a lot.
Yes.
I mean, it's in a way. Do you guys hand out like sheets? I'm guessing
we
too?
do.
Okay, good.
We have plenty of handouts that we usually give out, or we also have like a bookmark with a QR code, and we kind of guide you through. Hey, this is our webpage. There's plenty of resources online, but if you need a physical handout, we also have them available too.
Because I could see it being almost an information overload, but still a lot of good information. So one thing, you want to have a goal and a vision when you go into having a garden.
Yes.
Right? So, basically, how do you define the goal and vision? I know I've heard some people say, well, and this is the mistake I've made in the past. Okay. And the reason I bring this up is because I don't think this is the right way to do it.
So don't know.
But I think a lot of people do this. Like I want strawberries. Like you're walking through, the big box stores, and you're like, I want peas and strawberries, and and you just go through and you're picking out these things, and then like by the time April comes around, May, your garden's burned up, and you're like, where are my strawberries? Where are my peas?
Yes.
So I guess in planning a garden, what are some better ways to plan that and choose, maybe what would be better for us?
No, that's an excellent question. I would say to determine the goal and to determine the mission would be what is the outcome of that garden, right? Is it going to be an educational garden, kind of like what we have at Escarate? It's a demonstration garden, but at the same time, if we have the resources and time, we kind of schedule visits so that we can teach people that about, hey, if you're going to plant your tomatoes, we actually start our seeds of the tomato seedlings like in late February in a little greenhouse where we actually kind of like, okay, there's weeks in advance of planting in order for as soon as April comes in, we plant them in the ground. We actually plant them, I want to say, by the end of March, so that they already have like a little bit of an extra boost and head start.
Yeah.
And they start producing in April, May, before the summer. Now, it does require some planning ahead of time. Most of the time is we have to understand that there's a very small window of growing between late winter and early summer. Okay. In terms of the plants will grow, but when they're producing,
that's when they produce best.
Yes.
So they actually, like you said, it actually is a big deal. Our mid-year high heat does not go well with it. Slows them down on the production.
Okay. And just to clarify, like the plants don't die in summer. It's just that because of the high heat, the pollination doesn't work on the flowers of a lot of vegetables. So you're not going to see any fruit. So we get in our office is a lot of people freaking out because like, hey, my tomato's not producing in the middle of July. And then I kind of tell them, hey, well, wait until September when we go below the 90 mark again, kind of like 80s, and they'll start producing more. So just to clarify, like the plants will continue to grow and they kind of go into a dormancy, a summer dormancy, if you want to call it, but then they bounce back.
So it's so funny you say that with tomato.
Yeah.
Because you actually brought something out that's happened to me. And the tomatoes are a great pick for our area. But I remember like as it would get hotter, I would see all these flowers and I wasn't seeing any fruit. And I'm like, what's going on? Are the bees missing it? Or, what's going on? And, but no, okay, that makes sense. And then I did notice they'll start again. And they'll take you all the way through October if we have a nice mild October. If
we don't have any like early freezes, I've harvested tomatoes in the middle of October. The other thing that maybe people will start to notice is you might have some fruit there, but it's going to get sun scald because the sun is actually hitting it too much. Peppers tend to do that as well. Tomatoes, herbs tend to, unless they're summer herbs, they kind of wilt a little bit. They get a little bit scorched too.
So if you get scorched, and this is actually, I've never had a chance to really ask anybody this. Like, I guess it doesn't change the flavor of the fruit, right? You just cut it off and you're fine. I mean, it makes it less appealing looks wise, but it doesn't.
True.
You can still.
Yes. In terms of any vegetables, they'll taste good. The difference is on herbs. There's certain herbs that in summer, if you let them go into seed, the herbs are going to taste a little bit bitter. It happens a lot with also leafy greens. So like if you're planting spinach in the middle of summer here, you will get it to grow, but it's going to, what we call bolt, which is when it throws seeds, but then it's going to be completely bitter and it's not going to be flavorful for you, right? So that's why I'll talk about the website in a little bit, but we have a planting calendar. I didn't bring a copy today, but we can definitely look it up online. And it tells you when to kind of start your seedlings. So a lot of the volunteer group that the Master Gardeners, they plant a lot of the seeds in February, March. They have the seedlings already a little bit weeks in advance before the last freeze. So they plant them in mid-April. They start growing through May. Everything gets a good start. We go into a summer dormancy. We still produce some stuff. Like, for example, cucumbers is one of them that kind of keeps producing. We have plenty of herbs. We plant a lot of basil, which is really good.
Yeah.
And then we kind of go into, and you can even plant things such as eggplant or okra that kind of thrives in the summer. And then we are already thinking about, so like coming in August and September, we're going to have plenty of harvest. But then the volunteers or any community garden that's out there needs to start thinking about what are we going to plant in the fall. So are we going to plant like kale? Are we going to have broccoli, spinach?
Cooler.
Because if you get ahead of time in a couple of weeks, then you're ready to go.
Oh, wow, nice.
So the only thing that I would like to add is maybe if you're planting if any community garden out there, if you're getting your seeds, usually the packet of seeds has like days to harvest, like a little calendar.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
You can actually go back on your days in your calendar and kind of check, well, when is it that I want to harvest? And if it's in the middle of August, or let's put a better example. If I want production of tomatoes in April or May, I'll probably have to plant those tomato seeds in the middle of February so that I have those weeks in advance.
And so on the fall planting season, which isn't talked about too much, but I guess you would plant in August. Is that right? Or when do you guys recommend to if you're looking for some fall, like the broccoli and some of the cooler?
I think we would start the seedlings like maybe the beginning of February. Maybe the last week of August, usually first week of September is when we start planting, because a lot of the leafy greens don't necessarily like being transplanted from like a little pot to a physical in-ground.
It's better to just plant them in where you want
seeds. Yeah.
Okay.
So that means that you have, let's say, I want to say that lettuce is something that you can harvest in 35 days, 45 days. Then that means that if our first freeze is in November, you kind of backtrack a month. And then that's when you plant your seeds and you'll have a month of production of lettuce. And then if you keep replanting it, it goes into a little bit of early winter. And then that's when the hard freezes come in. And then a lot of plants either can take it, such as kale. I've had kale with actually ice on it, and it actually
it's crazy. Some
so
of those
kale
beans,
loves it.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee you that all of the tomatoes in November or December, they're gonna wilt.
That's all, and it's funny because you can actually use your garden as kind of the first hard freeze indicator.
True.
You know, it's like, oh, it felt cold, and you go out and look at it. Oh, it was cold.
It was cold.
So that's interesting. Now, I did see like one of the another important thing that you guys do talk about if you attend one of these, and obviously, you know, you want to go to these so you can learn as much as you can. I think it's amazing that it's hands-on and you do it around different parts of the city, but like where to choose to put a garden.
Okay.
I've seen, and I've made 2 mistakes over my lifetime, and one was you don't mistake heat for sunlight.
True.
So I remember I had found like kind of an open spot, and it was under some trees, you know, and this was in North Texas. And I remember I planted some tomatoes and all this, and they got kind of leggy and didn't really do much. And I was like, it's hot outside. Where are they growing? Well, they don't just need heat. They need light. They need sun. And then when I realized, I kind of stood back a bit from the garden, and I saw how it did get some kind of late morning, early morning to late morning sun, but that was it. By midday, the shade from the tree was over it through the afternoon, the other trees. And then the other mistake I made, and I don't know if, you know, this is probably a less common one. I had done a raised bed, and now I love container gardening. I think it's amazing, and I know you guys know everything about that, but I was actually turned on to that by you guys, and I'm probably never going back. But anyway, before I knew about it, raised bed, I bought one at Lowe's, and I put it in. I even put a layer of plastic at the bottom, and I put all the right soils in there. And the first year did great. Yields were great. You know, plants looked great. Second year, yields were down. Third year, yields were like nothing, and plants didn't look very good. When I was going through and taking it out, I had found that the next door neighbor's pine tree, the roots had gone in under there. It found that, and there were all these little feeder roots. So the plants had been gone a long time ago, but when I was taking out the soil, I'm finding these little feeder roots. Finally, I pull up a root that's maybe 1/4 of an inch, and I break it, and it smells like pine. And I see the guy's giant pine tree. So you have to be careful that you're not going to have interference with other plants.
Yes, I want to say that maybe going back to kind of like the first, let's talk a little bit about sun and light. A lot of us go through the big box stores, and what does the tag say for most plants? It's full sun. And I always like telling people that come into the office or that are watching this, remember that it's not El Paso sun, right? Because
it's like Philadelphia.
We're talking about high humidity environments with maybe, yes, it's full sun, but they have plenty of moisture
and clouds. And
So on our side, it's more like, okay, you can put a plant at 100-degree weather, but without humidity in the atmosphere, it's just gonna like almost, if it's just gonna suck up all the water. And that's why we see our plants a lot of the time wilting, and then it kind of like goes into 6 p.m. and then it just kind of perk back up. It's because the plants cannot survive in the combination of high, what we would call maybe UV exposure, lack of humidity, and then temperature-wise too. So my best advice is, if you do see that tag, try to look for a place where it receives the majority of the sun in the morning before 3 p.m. And then hopefully you have a section where it actually gets a little bit of shade for the afternoon, 5, 6 p.m. That would be ideal. I know that a lot of the community gardens are actually not able to choose and pick what areas they want to grow, right? But there's ways to play around it.
But at home, you would.
True.
You know, because you could put it on the east side.
That's true.
You know, so you get the morning sun,
but then
and then if you've got the afternoon, and actually, I had this where I was starting some cactus on the side, and I was worried that it wasn't going to be enough sun, but it was actually western sun. And it was from about 1 to about 5, and it was doing fine. Good.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it is intense. So when you're selecting plants, you know, you're right. It's they don't really have like, you know, it should say, you know, full sun back east. El Paso, part sun.
And a lot of these plants are coming from different places that are not Southwest Texas. That maybe it's true that they're full sunlight, but not El Paso dry, humidity, scorching heat.
Yeah.
The second question, maybe it's like on going back to location and then maybe like the feeder routes. A lot of the time, remember that plants are going to look for the resources, the water and the nutrients, no matter what. I would try to, like, that's a perfect example. Container gardening is something that we encourage a lot of the time because it allows us to control soil conditions, moisture conditions, talking about the heat, right? But then you will have some weeds coming in, or you'll have some other feeder roots. Maybe try putting it away from any existing plantings that already exist.
Yeah.
And most of the time, what I've seen is a good balance in a raised bed is, okay, plenty of sun, plenty of space, keep weeds suppressed as much as you can. And if you have a tree that's super close by because you need the shade, be aware that in reality, you have to think about it as a two system. So you're watering the tree and you're watering the raised bed. And a lot of people have called me in my office and said, hey, my trees are being, like, they look very bad. And I always ask them, do you have grass underneath your trees? Underneath the canopy of the tree. And that's when they tell me yes. And then I explain to them, well, the grass is getting all the water, tree needs water as well. So the same thing with a raised bed. If your raised bed, even if you put a little layer of like either
trees
plastic,
find a way.
Like the tree's going to look for that water. So you have to remember you're going to give your tree water and you have to give your raised bed water as well.
So that way they're not competing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And are there, are there ways to conserve water? I mean, are there like kind of tips and tricks that can help with reduce the needs?
There's a lot of tricks now, just going back into kind of like the conditions, the ground conditions that we have here in El Paso. One of the things that we mentioned in the past was the use of container gardening. The reasons that we recommend a lot of that is because our soil here in the desert, here in the El Paso desert, part of the Chihuahuan desert, our soils are very sandy, or the complete opposite, very calcareous, which is caliche, right? So those both type of soils are going to drain water super, super fast. So by putting things in a container where you actually get good quality soil, such as the potting mix or garden mix that you get at the big box stores, will retain more of that moisture. So that's where we are trying to kind of steer people into, hey, if you really want a high production where you can control environmental conditions such as moisture, the way to go is containers and raised beds. Now, what keeps the water there, it's the organic matter. So if you can compost, or maybe if you can get some worm castings, kind of like they sell it in bags as well, it's all about amending your soil with organic matter, because organic matter is the glue that's going to keep the water in the raised bed instead of evaporating or percolating down.
And it actually, I had gotten some, I think, Miracle Grow, they already had the pre-mix,
True.
And I was surprised at how efficient it was at holding the water. And I was shocked because I'm used to, 10 years ago when soils weren't as good, or you had to make your own mix, you had to really get in there. But this year, there were times when I go to water them the next day and there's still water in the soil.
And
like,
wow. There's a lot of moisture, right?
So I was shocked. So and so if you don't, if you don't want to just have to make your own necessarily. I know you guys probably have tips on the website, which we'll get to in a little bit, on how you can make your own mix but they do sell pre-made mixes now that are very efficient. So
they do. My best advice to you is, if you're thinking about having a lot of community garden, like if you're starting a community garden, the best thing that you can do is get your soil tested. That way you know kind of like what you have to begin with. There's plenty of resources out there. New Mexico State provides a soil test. Texas A&M also through AgriLife Extension provides you with the ability of testing your soil. You send a sample, usually results will come back telling you what type of nutrients you have.
On the west side, so there's the west side, you can just take a rock.
Here's my rock. You don't have any soil.
Right.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because, like, for example, I live on the west side of town and I have to do everything in raised beds because there's no way that a carrot is going to break through the rocks, right?
The caliche.
Yeah, so that's one of the main things is when you're starting a community garden, make sure what's the route that you're going to take. Are you going to take more of the raised bed container route, or do you have really good soil that maybe you can do physical and ground plantings, but you're still going to have to compost and amend it to retain water and to make it super healthy?
Yeah, I think raised bed is just an amazing way for us here. And then I guess there's like the important thing of cleanup, and that's one thing you guys are going to teach too when you go to these I mean, you can't just, I mean, you can, but it's better instead of just leaving the plants like, growing all over the place. It's actually better to kind of maintain them, pull off the dead leaves. And
yeah, I guess in the plant world, we also talk about sanitation. So sanitation everywhere, right? Inside of your house, outside of your house. When we talk about sanitation in the garden, it's more of there's a lot of people that want to have everything natural, and that's really good because kind of like when the leaves drop in autumn and they kind of want to
compost.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
But I just want to clarify that is also a way of diseases to reinfect your garden. So if you currently have conditions in your garden such as any type of disease in any type of plant, just be aware that the hygiene process, the sanitation process is removing that so that in spring it doesn't reinfect the same tree. So I always tell my customers it's all about amending the soil, keeping the natural cycle intact, such as like the leaves falling in autumn. But then if I spot that my peach tree was sick in spring, the fruit didn't look really nice, there was a lot of bugs, there was a lot of infestations, then I start thinking about this section of the garden needs to be sanitized. It needs to be removed. I can put it in my compost pile or throw it in the trash if it's a certain disease. And then I need to make sure that I'm bringing other resources, other sources outside. But not contaminated ones.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, it comes with experience, right? You have to be familiar with some diseases, how it reinfects, but that's why we're here for, so that we can help you determine that.
Awesome. And so where can people go to find out information on when they can attend these events, and also some of the other stuff that you're talking about, like where they can learn how to make their own mixes of potting soil and tips and tricks?
Yeah. I guess my best advice would be, if you want to learn about the events as fast as possible, it would be through our social media.
Okay.
It's either the Master Gardeners of El Paso through Facebook and Instagram, and that's how you would type it in, El Paso Master Gardeners, El Paso chapter. We have about 6,000 followers that actually, so the team of volunteers is really good about posting tips depending on the month, things that we're doing. Like we're going to have an event this weekend actually about rainwater harvesting, passive rainwater harvesting. So social media is the best way to find us. And then if you want more resources in terms of kind of like the handouts that we were talking about, you would have to go through Google or any website that you're using, any search bar, and you would do txmg.org/El Paso/. So there's a little tab that says links to articles, and that's where we have all of the resources already, PDF versions, that way you can just read them, download them. Or the third option that you have is you can always go to our office located at Azcarate Park. Before the entrance of Azcarate Park, it's actually at the Azcarate Annex. The address is 301 Manny Martinez Senior Drive. The zip code is 79905 here in El Paso. And we actually, on the second floor, you can actually reach our front desk staff, and then they have the resources for you. So if you come in with questions such as pomegranates, if I'm there in the office, they usually guide them to me, and I tell them, hey, let's talk about this, and here's some handouts that can help you. Let's check about this disease. There's other handouts that we have, such as advice, planting calendars, planting list about all the trees that do well here. So come and visit us, or check our website, Facebook, social media.
Awesome. And the best thing about going to see them is everything is tailored to our county.
That's true.
So, I mean, that's just that alone is amazing. And so you guys, we know what does well and what doesn't do well, like diseases and pests and everything. So go visit them. Thank you very much, Eddie.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to comment, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can check out our past archive of episodes on kfoxtv.com or listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for breaking it down with me, and we'll see you next time here on The Breakdown.